The night wind bit into Alicia's skin like needles as she curled up beneath the staircase of a broken building in downtown New York, her arms wrapped around her thin body trying to preserve the last drops of warmth. The thin jacket she wore was tattered, the zipper broken, the fabric stained with the dirt of weeks. Her stomach growled a painful sound, echoing inside her like a drum of misery. She had eaten nothing since yesterday, just a piece of leftover bread she found in a trash bin behind an old diner. She was only 16, but the city had aged her eyes. After losing both her parents in a car crash 2 years ago, no family came forward. No uncles, no aunts, no grandparents, nothing. She had been tossed into a foster home, where she was beaten for stealing food from the fridge. She ran away thinking the streets would be kinder. They were not. Alicia spent her days digging through dumpsters, looking for recyclables, anything she could sell for a few cents. Cans, bottles, plastic scraps. Sometimes she found old clothes or broken shoes. On good days, she would make enough to buy a small sandwich or a slice of pizza. On bad days, which were most days, she just drank tap water and cried herself to sleep. That morning, as the city woke up with honking horns and shouting, vendors, Alicia dragged her cart down the alley, her fingers numb. Her boots had holes, water seeped in from the snow that fell last night. She passed people in coats and scarves who looked away pretending not to see her. Some whispered things under their breath, others just walked faster. At noon, she reached a collection center, where an old man with a grey beard took her bottles. He gave her $3. Her eyes lit up with a bit of hope. Maybe a sandwich today, maybe hot chocolate. But just as she was about to leave, a boy maybe a few years older bumped into her. Her plastic bag full of cans dropped to the ground. Without saying anything, he grabbed the bag and ran. She chased after him, shouting, "Please stop, please, that's all I have." Her voice cracked with desperation. But the boy vanished into the crowd. She stood in the middle of the sidewalk, crying, holding her empty cart. People passed her without stopping. She sat on the curb and wept. Her sobs shook her whole body. She felt invisible, unwanted. A little girl passed by, holding her mother's hand, and pointed at her. The mother pulled the girl away, as if Alicia was a disease. Later in the afternoon, she went to a soup kitchen. She stood in line among the homeless, elderly, and sick. When it was her turn, they handed her a bowl of watery soup and a piece of bread. She took it with trembling hands. It was the only hot food she had all week. She sat in the corner of the room, sipping slowly, trying to make it last. An older woman sat beside her, asking her name. Alicia told her. The woman smiled and said she reminded her of her daughter, who passed away. Alicia nodded but said nothing more. She was afraid to speak, afraid to hope. Every time she let someone in, they hurt her or left her. As the sun set, she returned to her spot beneath the stairs, her cart beside her, covered with a dirty blanket she found last week. She held a small stuffed bunny against her chest. It was old, its ear torn, but it was the last thing her mother gave her before she died. Alicia whispered into the dark air, "I miss you, Mom. I miss you, Dad. Why did you leave me here?" Her tears flowed silently, falling into the cracks of the sidewalk. The city kept moving cars, driving lights, flashing people, laughing somewhere far away. But under those cold stares, Alicia wept alone, lost in a world, too cruel for someone so young and so broken. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would bring more trials, more pain, more betrayal. But also tomorrow would bring a stranger, someone who would see her, not as trash, not as a burden, but as a human being. But for tonight, she only had the cold, the hunger and the ache of a shattered heart. Morning came with no kindness. The sun rose behind grey clouds, and the smell of rotten garbage filled the narrow alley where Alicia had spent the night. Her bones ached. Her lips cracked from dryness. She sat up slowly, brushing dirt from her cheek. Her blanket was damp from the morning dew, and her cart stood untouched beside her, holding Nothing but a few empty bags. With a heavy sigh, she stood and pulled the cart through the alley. Her eyes scanned the ground for anything she could use or sell. A crushed soda can, a piece of metal, broken glass. She had to be careful not to cut her hands again. Her fingers were covered with small scars from bottles that had betrayed her grip. At a busy intersection near Chinatown, she saw a man in a thick coat handing out flyers. He smiled at people trying to get them to come into a new bakery. Alicia watched for a moment, then approached with hesitation. Maybe if she asked politely, they would give her something. Just a slice of bread, maybe even crumbs. She tugged the man's coat and whispered, "Excuse me, sir, is there any food for someone who can't pay?" The man looked her up and down with a strange expression, then pointed to the back alley beside the bakery. He told her to wait there, and he would bring something. Alicia smiled, her heart fluttering. Maybe today would be different. Maybe kindness still existed. She waited behind the building, watching smoke rise from the vents. She waited 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. Finally, a woman came out the back door, holding a small box. Alicia reached out to take it, but the woman threw it into the dumpster and slammed the door. Confused, Alicia climbed up and opened the lid. Inside the box were burnt bagels, moldy buns, and a broken egg. Her stomach churned. She picked the least spoiled one and bit into it, wincing. It was dry and bitter, but it was food. She sat behind the dumpster, chewing slowly when she heard footsteps. A boy, maybe her age or younger, appeared with a paper bag. He smiled at her and said he had seen her waiting. He said he worked nearby and had some food left over. Alicia hesitated, but the smell from the bag was sweet and warm. She took it with shaky hands and thanked him over and over. He nodded and walked away. She opened the bag and her eyes widened. Inside was a sandwich and a cookie. It felt like a treasure chest. She took one bite and closed her eyes, letting the warmth fill her chest. But then a sharp pain in her stomach made her double over. Her breath grew short. The cookie had a strange taste. The sandwich too salty. Her mouth burned slightly. She realized too late. The boy had poisoned the food. Or maybe it was just rotten leftovers. Either way, her body rejected it violently. She vomited behind the dumpster and curled into a ball, crying. Her stomach cramped. Her head throbbed. No one came to help. No one saw her. She spent the next hour lying in the cold filth, shivering as rain began to fall. The sky opened up and soaked her completely. Her hair clung to her face. Her clothes grew heavier. Her cart rolled slightly as the wind pushed it. She finally forced herself up and dragged her cart back to her spot under the stairs. But it was already taken. A man older and bigger had taken her space. When she approached, he growled at her and told her to leave. He said the street belonged to the strong. So Alicia wandered the wet city, her shoes squelching with every step, her heart sinking lower than ever. Every building she passed was filled with warmth she could not touch. Every smile she saw was a reminder of everything she had lost. She finally found a bench under a bridge where she curled up, hugging her knees. Rain still dripped from cracks above, and her lips trembled. She had been tricked again, used again, thrown away again. Her whisper was so soft, even the night could barely hear it. Why does everyone hurt me? She looked up at the sky, but it gave no answers. Tomorrow would be another day of hunger, another day of walking, another day of hoping someone would care. And still, she did not know that someone kind had already seen her from afar. He would not come today, but he would come soon. The next morning, Alicia woke with her clothes still damp, clinging to her thin frame like ice. Her joints hurt and her throat burned. She had caught a cold from the rain, and it made every breath feel heavier. Still, she stood up because the world did not pause for broken girls. She wiped her face with her sleeve and pushed the cart again through the sleeping streets. The early dawn cast a faint blue glow over the sidewalk. Trash scattered everywhere from the wind the night before. Alicia's shoes scraped against concrete, her steps slow and tired. Near the subway entrance, she saw a woman in a red coat talking on the phone. The woman's eyes met hers for a brief second, and Alicia looked away quickly. She was used to stares of pity or disgust, or worse, nothing at all. But then the woman walked over. She asked if Alicia needed help. Alicia hesitated, then nodded. The woman introduced herself and said she was looking for someone to help clean a storage room for her little shop down the street. She said she would pay cash, $20. Alicia's heart skipped a beat. That was more than she usually made in 3 days. She agreed immediately, following the woman down the block. They reached a small clothing boutique with dusty windows. Inside were racks of old jackets and faded dresses. The woman led her to a back room, filled with boxes and bags and broken hangers. She handed Alicia a broom and gloves and told her to start sweeping. Alicia worked harder than she had in weeks. She swept every corner, stacked boxes, arranged shelves. Hours passed. Her arms ached and her back screamed, but her eyes shone with hope. $20 meant food and maybe new socks. By evening, she had cleaned the whole room. The woman came back in, smiled, and told her she did a good job. Alicia waited quietly, heart pounding. But instead of handing her money, the woman walked to the front and locked the door. She told Alicia she had no money, that she was only trying to help by giving her something to do, that maybe if Alicia worked for a few more days, she could get clothes instead of cash. Alicia stared in disbelief. Her hands trembled. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried to explain that she needed money, not jackets, that she had been promised. But the woman shrugged and turned away. Alicia stood there frozen. The world spun. She felt like screaming, but she had no voice left. Finally, she picked up her bag and left the store. The bell above the door rang softly like a cruel joke. Outside, the sky was turning orange and gold. People were heading home, laughing, holding hands, drinking coffee. Alicia stood alone on the sidewalk, her stomach growling louder than before. Her body was sore and her eyes filled with tears again. She walked to a small corner where she sat down and pulled her knees to her chest. Her breath was shaky and her throat ached. She had been fooled again, used again, lied to again. As the streetlights flickered on, Alicia whispered to the air around her, "Am I really that worthless?" A small bird landed near her feet, chirping before flying away again. It was the only living thing that noticed her that night. She closed her eyes and cried until her cheeks were numb. Still, she did not know that someone was watching from across the street, a man in a dark coat standing by a lamppost. He had seen her walk past this corner for days. He did not speak. Not yet, but the story was starting to shift. Even the darkest nights begin to break. The following morning, Alicia sat on a crate behind a deli, licking the last crumbs from a small piece of bread she had found in the trash. Her body was weak, her head pounding from fever and hunger. But she forced herself to keep moving. Lying down meant giving up, and she could not afford that. She walked through Midtown, where towering buildings cast long shadows on the sidewalk. People in suits passed her like ghosts, their shoes clicking against the pavement, their perfume filling the air. She smelled of old sweat and damp fabric, and no one wanted her near. At a busy crosswalk, a cheerful-looking woman with blonde curls and bright lipstick approached her with a wide smile. She wore a white coat and carried a clipboard. She asked if Alicia was alone, if she needed help, if she was interested in a special youth program that offered meals and housing for girls like her. Alicia's eyes lit up with cautious hope. The woman's voice was gentle, and her smile seemed genuine. She said all Alicia had to do was come with her to a center just a few blocks away. Alicia followed without asking too many questions, because her heart was already clinging to the idea of a bed and a hot shower. They reached a building that looked like an old office. Inside, the walls were bare, the furniture old and the windows covered. The woman led her to a room and told her to wait. Alicia sat on a plastic chair, her hands in her lap. Minutes passed, then an hour. A man came in wearing a long coat. and holding a camera. He said he needed to take pictures for her file. He asked her to stand and smile. Alicia did as told. Then he asked her to remove her jacket. She hesitated, but he insisted it was standard procedure. Something in his eyes felt wrong, but Alicia was too tired to argue. She had been promised food and warmth. Just before anything else could happen, the front door burst open. Another woman, older and dressed in black, came in shouting. She pointed at the man and called him a liar, a criminal. Alicia did not understand, but the woman grabbed her hand and pulled her outside. They ran through the cold air down 2 blocks until they reached a small shelter run by volunteers. Inside, the light was soft and the smell of soup filled the air. The woman told Alicia, the man and the blonde woman were known for luring in girls with fake promises. That many had been hurt before someone reported them. Alicia sat on a mattress in the corner, shivering from shock. Her hands would not stop shaking. She had almost been taken, used, erased, again. Her tears flowed without sound as she curled into herself. She stayed at the shelter for 1 night. They gave her a blanket, a cup of soup, and a new toothbrush. The kindness overwhelmed her, but she could not stay. She never stayed anywhere long. She always felt like a burden, like she would be chased out eventually. By morning, she left quietly, leaving the blanket folded neatly on the bed. She pushed her cart into the street, her heart heavier than ever. She had been lured with kindness that turned sharp like a knife. Every smile she saw now felt like a trap. But as she crossed a quiet corner, someone called out to her, a voice calm and warm. She turned and saw a man in a black coat with gentle eyes and a paper cup in his hand. He offered her coffee and said he had seen her before. She stared unsure. Her feet wanted to run. Her heart wanted to trust. He said his name was Michael and that he wasn't here to take anything, just to talk. Alicia stood still, unsure what to believe anymore. But she did not walk away. Not yet. Alicia stood at the edge of the sidewalk, her hands frozen at her sides. As the man named Michael held out the coffee cup, steam rose from it, curling into the morning air. He didn't move closer, didn't pressure her. He just waited with eyes that didn't judge. She looked at the cup, then back at him, then back at the cup again. Hunger tightened her stomach, and the cold stung her fingers. But she had learned too well how dangerous kindness could be. Still, something about this man's quietness made her feel less afraid. She stepped forward slowly and took the cup, her fingers brushing against his for a brief second. It was warm and real and smelled like cinnamon and chocolate. She mumbled thank you and took a sip. It burned her tongue, but she didn't care. Warmth filled her chest in a way she hadn't felt in weeks. Michael asked if she had eaten. She shook her head. He didn't ask why. He simply pointed to a bench nearby and walked there slowly, as if giving her time to choose. Alicia followed hesitantly, sitting at the far end of the bench. They sat in silence for a while, watching people rush by. Michael didn't ask her name. He didn't ask what happened to her. He just talked about the weather and the pigeons and a bakery down the street that always burned their muffins. His voice was calm and steady, like waves against a quiet shore. Finally, Alicia spoke. She said her name was Alicia and she lived wherever the police didn't chase her away. He nodded like he already knew. She told him about her cart, her bottles, her staircase home, about the boy who stole from her and the woman who tricked her, and the fake job, and the cookie. That made her sick. Her voice cracked as she talked, and her eyes filled with tears. But Michael didn't interrupt or look away. He just listened. When she finished, she stared at the ground waiting for him to say something cruel, or give a lecture, or offer fake help. But he just said, "I'm sorry." 2 simple words that felt more honest than anything she had heard in years. He reached into his coat and handed her a folded paper. On it was the address of a community center and a name, Sarah. He said his sister worked there, that they had food and blankets, and a doctor who didn't ask too many questions. Alicia clutched the paper but didn't say anything. She didn't want to believe yet. She had believed too many times before. Michael stood and said he'd be around the next few days if she needed another coffee or just wanted to talk again. Then he left, walking down the street, disappearing into the city fog. Alicia sat alone on the bench for a long time, staring at the coffee cup in her hands. She wanted to throw it away. She wanted to scream at the paper, but instead, she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. That night, she didn't sleep under the stairs. She found a quiet spot behind a closed church and pulled her blanket around her. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But for the first time, she whispered something different. Maybe not everyone wants to hurt me. The stars blinked above as if they heard her, and the wind carried her words into the dark. The sun rose slowly over the city, casting pale light on rooftops and cracked sidewalks. Alicia sat up behind the church, rubbing her eyes. Her back ached from the cold ground, and her throat was dry. But in her pocket, the folded paper still waited. She held it in her hands, staring at the name. Written in blue ink, Sarah, the name of a stranger. The address of a place she had never been. She didn't trust it, not completely. But Michael's voice echoed in her mind, soft and steady. Just go and see. She stood brushing dirt from her pants and began to walk. The city moved around her, people, rushing buses, roaring steam rising from grates. Her cart rattled behind her wheels, squeaking with every bump. She passed a bakery where the smell of sugar nearly stopped her heart, and a coffee shop where people laughed into their phones. 2 hours later, she stood in front of the address, a small building tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. The door was painted blue with a sign above that read, "Open hearts, open hands." She reached out and knocked 3 times, then waited, heart pounding. A woman opened the door, mid-30s, brown hair in a bun, eyes soft like candlelight. Alicia stepped back, but the woman smiled and asked her name. She said Alicia in a voice so quiet it nearly disappeared. The woman nodded and said, "I'm Sarah." The name felt like a puzzle piece locking into place. Sarah invited her in without questions. The room smelled like soup and lemon cleaner. There were couches and blankets, and a table full of muffins and fruit. A heater hummed softly in the corner, and soft music played from a small radio. Alicia stood at the threshold, frozen. Sarah didn't rush her. She walked over and offered her a chair, then stepped away. Slowly, Alicia entered, sitting down, her legs trembling. Sarah placed a cup of tea in front of her and said nothing more. That day, Alicia stayed for 3 hours. She didn't talk much, just listened to the quiet sounds around her, watched other girls come and go. Some looked like her, some worse. One had a baby wrapped in a scarf. Another had bruises under her eyes. They weren't judged. No one whispered. No one pointed. Sarah came back with a pair of socks and a bar of soap and placed them gently beside Alicia. She asked if Alicia had a safe place to sleep. Alicia shook her head. Sarah didn't look surprised. She only said there was a cot in the back if she needed it. Alicia didn't take it. Not yet. But before she left, Sarah handed her a small card with her name and number, just in case. As Alicia stepped back into the cold city, she looked at the card and wondered how something so small could feel so heavy. That night, she didn't return to the church. Instead, she went to the back of the center and lay near the wall. She didn't knock. She didn't speak, but she felt safer there than anywhere else. She curled beneath her blanket and held the card against her chest, and for the first time in weeks, she slept without crying. The morning air was softer near the center. Alicia woke to the quiet sound of birds singing above the roof and the distant clatter of trash cans being wheeled into alleys. Her back still ached, but not as much. The wall behind her felt like some kind of invisible shield, keeping the world away. She stretched slowly and stood brushing herself off. Her stomach growled, but it wasn't the same desperate ache as before. She had eaten a muffin yesterday and a slice of apple someone left on the table. Her body remembered kindness, even if her heart still doubted it. She walked around the corner and sat on the front steps of the blue door. A few minutes later, it opened, and Sarah stepped out, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Alicia without speaking and sat beside her. The street was quiet, the wind gentle. They sipped in silence. Sarah finally asked how Alicia had slept. Alicia shrugged. Not good, not bad. Just quiet. Sarah smiled and said that was better than many. Later, Alicia was invited inside again. She didn't hesitate this time. She sat at the table and helped peel oranges with another girl named Lainey, who had a chipped tooth and eyes like fire. Lani made her laugh for the first time in weeks by telling her about a cat that attacked her sandwich last night. They cleaned together, folded towels, and sorted cans for the pantry. Alicia's hands moved slowly, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Usefulness. Her fingers had always been picking, trash digging through filth, clinging to nothing. Now they were helping, doing something that mattered even just a little. Michael came by around noon with a bag of pastries. When he saw Alicia, his face lit up. He didn't say much, just handed her a warm croissant and asked how her feet were holding up. She told him about the new socks. He smiled wider. They sat for a while by the window, watching snow begin to fall soft and slow like ash. Alicia's eyes followed each flake as if tracking a secret message in the air. Michael said, "Winter in the city was cruel, but sometimes it taught people how strong they really were." Before he left, he gave her a book, a small novel with bent corners. He said it was his favorite. Alicia held it carefully, like it might break in her hands. She had not read anything in a long time, not since school, not since before the accident that took her parents and everything else. That evening, Alicia stayed in the center. She accepted the cot Sarah had offered and lay on the thin mattress in a quiet back room. There were 4 others sleeping nearby, all girls like her, all carrying stories. They didn't speak aloud. Alicia stared at the ceiling, holding the book to her chest. She still didn't trust this peace. She kept waiting for it to vanish, for the kindness to twist into cruelty. But for this one night, she didn't have to run. She didn't have to sleep on cement or hide behind dumpsters. She closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of soap and fabric softener. And for the first time since she lost everything, she dreamed. 3 days passed quietly. Alicia began helping more around the center, sweeping floors, organizing supplies, wiping tables after meals. She never asked for anything, but Sarah always made sure there was a warm plate waiting for her and a new pair of gloves when the snow thickened outside. She started reading the books. Michael had given her page by page each word, carving a small door in her heart. It was a story about a girl who lived in the shadows of a world that never noticed her. Every time Alicia closed the book, her fingers shook because it felt too much like her own. Life written by a stranger who somehow knew. One afternoon, Michael visited again. He brought cocoa and a scarf for her, one he said his mom had knitted years ago. Alicia hesitated, then wrapped it around her neck. It was the softest thing she had touched in years. When he smiled at her, she didn't look away this time. But not all memories stay buried. That evening, just as the sun began to fall, Alicia stepped out to throw trash in the bins. Behind the center, she turned the corner and froze. There he was, the boy who had stolen her bag of cans weeks ago, the one who had run into her and left her crying in the middle of the street. He stood with 2 others, laughing and smoking behind a parked truck. He saw her and his grin dropped. "Well, well," he muttered. "Look who's still alive." Alicia's heart thudded. Her breath shortened. She turned to walk away, but he stepped in front of her. He asked if she had anything on her this time. Told her maybe she owed him for that food he helped her buy with her own bottles. His friends laughed and moved closer. Panic wrapped around her chest. But before she could shout, a voice rang out behind them. It was Michael. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. He simply stepped between Alicia and the boys and looked each of them in the eyes. The boys laughed nervously, then backed away, muttering curses as they disappeared into the falling snow. Alicia's knees buckled, and she sat on the cold step, gasping for air. Michael crouched beside her and didn't say anything. He let her breathe. Later inside, Sarah gave her a warm towel and a cup of broth. Alicia held the cup tightly, hands shaking, not from cold, but memory. She hadn't realized how afraid she still was, how fragile her sense of safety had become. Sarah sat across from her and told her something she hadn't heard in years. You are not alone anymore. That night, Alicia didn't sleep in fear. She slept with the scarf still around her neck, the book beside her pillow, and the knowledge that someone had stood for her. When she couldn't stand for herself, the city was still cruel. But now she wasn't fighting it alone. The morning light that slipped through the small window above. Alicia's cot felt different, softer. It didn't burn her eyes or remind her of cold sidewalks and empty streets. It gently kissed her face like a quiet welcome. She sat up slowly, the scarf still wrapped around her neck, the book still by her side. Her chest felt heavy, but not with fear this time. It was the weight of something new, something unfamiliar, hope. After breakfast, Alicia helped Sarah prepare small food parcels for others on the street. They packed sandwiches and fruit and warm socks in brown paper bags. Alicia tied each bag with care, remembering how it felt to be the one on the outside, with nothing in her hands and no one to see her. Later in the day, she went with Sarah and Lainey to deliver the parcels. They walked under bridges and through narrow alleys, talking with people Alicia had once hidden from. A man with missing teeth thanked her with tears in his eyes. A woman with a baby wrapped in an old hoodie kissed her hand. Every thank you echoed inside Alicia like a song she had forgotten. Her fingers had been used to dig through trash, but now they gave something back. As they returned to the center, snow began to fall again. Alicia looked up, watching the flakes swirl around the rooftops. She let one land on her nose and didn't wipe it away. For the first time, she wasn't walking with her head down. When they reached the door, Michael was waiting. He had brought sandwiches again and a small flower in a cup. It was a simple yellow bloom with a bent stem, but it made Alicia smile in a way that reached her eyes. They sat on the front step together, watching the snow collect on the curb. Michael spoke about nothing and everything, his voice steady, like always. Alicia told him about her dream from the night before, about her parents standing in a field, waving at her, and telling her it was okay to move on. She didn't cry when she said it. Her voice didn't break, but Michael noticed the way her fingers clutched the flower a little tighter. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver chain. It had a pendant shaped like a star. He said it had belonged to his sister once, and she had given it to him before she left the country to study. He wanted Alicia to have it. Alicia refused at first, but he insisted and gently fastened it around her neck. That night, Alicia stayed up reading, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want the feeling of that day to end. She read until her eyes grew heavy and her hands dropped the book onto her blanket. She fell asleep with the star pendant resting over her heart and the flower in the cup. On the windowsill beside her, she still carried the scars of the street, the hunger, the betrayal, the ache. But now she also carried warmth, and in that warmth, something inside her finally began to heal. Weeks passed. Like pages in the book Alicia kept under her pillow. The city remained loud, cold, unkind in many corners. But for her, a quiet corner of peace had been carved out. She no longer wandered alone with her cart rattling behind her. The staircase where she once slept stayed buried in snow, forgotten. Each day she helped more around the center. She organized shelves, sorted blankets, greeted new faces at the door. Her hands became steady. Her voice no longer shook when she spoke. She laughed more with Lanny and shared stories at the table each night. She stopped counting the days since she had been hurt and started remembering the ones that felt safe. Michael visited often, always with something small in his coat. pocket a granola bar, a new pen, a pair of mittens. But most of all, he brought time and attention. He listened without judging, asked questions without pressing, and spoke like she mattered. One afternoon, after helping deliver food to an elderly shelter, Michael waited outside the center, his hands in his pockets, eyes soft like always. He asked Alicia to walk with him, and they strolled past old bookstores and frozen fountains, the snow crunching beneath their feet. He told her about his job fixing computers and how he once wanted to be a teacher. She told him how she used to draw in school, how her mom kept every one of her scribbled flowers in a drawer by the fridge. They stopped in front of a park where children in puffy coats threw snowballs and built uneven snowmen. Alicia watched them with a quiet smile, her breath forming clouds in the air. Michael looked at her and asked gently if she ever thought about what came next. She turned to him unsure. He said he had seen her change over the past month, not into someone's new, but into the girl she was always meant to be. Before the world tried to break her, he told her he saw someone brave, someone full of light, someone worth standing beside. Then he told her he had fallen in love with her. The words hit like thunder, but landed like petals. Alicia stood frozen, not from fear, but from disbelief. All her life, she had been used, discarded, abandoned. No one had ever said those words to her without wanting something in return. But Michael didn't look away. He didn't rush her. He simply waited. She took a deep breath, her chest trembling, and looked into his eyes. She told him she didn't know how to be loved, not yet, that there were still pieces of her she hadn't found. But if he was willing to walk with her, if he could wait, then maybe, just maybe, she could learn. Michael smiled and nodded. I'll wait as long as it takes. And that was enough. They stood there beneath the grey sky as snow fell gently around them. And for the first time in Alicia's life, the cold didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the end of a long winter and the beginning of something new. She had lived through the hardest parts of the world, seen the sharpest sides of humanity, been torn down again and again. But now she had warmth in her chest, stars around her neck, and a hand that stayed, even when she had nothing to offer. Alicia had survived the streets of New York, and now she was learning how to live.